Dear friends, welcome to our new episode of Toptalk. Today we have a special edition with two interesting guests who happen to be in Baku nowadays. Colonel Lyman Collins, founding director of the Modern War Institute at West Point. Colonel John Spencer, who currently serves as the chair of urban warfare studies at the same institute. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for finding time for this video interview. I gave a very modest introduction for each of you because we don't have sufficient time to go through your background for each of you, but I'm sure whoever is interested, they can easily Google and find a lot of interesting stuff about your both military and academic experience. Gentlemen, you've been here in Azerbaijan for the past few days for your field trip for Karabakh. I want to start with you, John, specifically because you've been commenting on the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the war in Gaza for the past couple of years. But I personally discovered you following your article on the Battle of Shusha. And then you included a chapter about this very battle in your book, Understanding Urban Warfare. It's your second time in Azerbaijan, including Karabakh. You are covering what we all accept as a key battle during the Second Karabakh War. Why is Shusha important for your studies? What particularly attracted you in terms of this battle?
I would say the biggest thing that drove me when I study modern urban battles as much as I can, we have this term called decisive battles, where there might be a lot of battles within a war, and like the 44-day war, there's many battles. Yeah. But there's one that determines the objectives of the war. And for me, Shusha was that, and that was being missed both in the overall narrative of the war, but just from the urban warfare history that war is the pursuit of political goals. The capture of Shusha was a decisive moment in the war that determined basically whether the political goal was achieved or not. Now, the actual how the battle occurred is also a fascinating look at. In military theory, people think there's one way to attack a city. This is a very strong case study of there's other ways to do it, from deception to infiltration, and all of the commanding the key terrain around the city that factor into that. Shusha gives so many different audiences a real case study of how important urban areas are, and that there's not just one way to do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for this laconic answer. In our literature, media, and film, Shusha always looked as an invincible fortress because it's a medieval town. It sits on top of a mountain table. It's surrounded by impassable cliffs. At least we always thought so. But for many Azerbaijanis, the war in Karabakh, and especially the Battle of Shusha in particular, is the triumph of the Azerbaijani special forces, excellently trained and mentally prepared in advance. They did this climbing. Many of us, we still don't know the exact details yet. This is why there are a lot of speculations. Some people imagine this as a Hollywood movie because the way they infiltrated into the city by scaling up 300-meter cliffs at least. What was your own impression when writing about the Battle of Shusha in your very first article, and then going and seeing everything on the ground?
Right. I mean, this is what I do. No matter how much you read about something or watch a video, as you and I went together in 2021, you just can't understand it until you stand at the base of those heights and see the cliffs or see the variations of it to understand that real people went up that way and then got into the city or whatever and started the battle. There's no replacement in actually visiting a site to understand the difficulty, the challenge, and the very human nature of it, that how much risk it took and it wasn't just one team. And actually, the more I've learned about it, that it was 4 very special forces teams that made 4 climbs, while 400 other special forces were approaching from a very steep direction, no less difficult. Just fascinating, and how weather played into it, as you know, to give that cover of the fall, but both is a disadvantage for like modern technology, but also an advantage to be able to. The interesting parts of this, everything from the deception of the defenders, like you said, that city should be defendable for a very long time, but war is always uncertain. So even coming out of the city to go to Deshalti was a part of war, the uncertainty of war. You make a decision and there can be advantages or disadvantages to that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned your first visit, which took place in November 2021. And if I'm not mistaken, you were the first foreign military expert who set foot on Shusha after 2024. And 4 years later, you are here again. Welcome back. Why did you feel you needed a second trip? Did you miss something during the first one? Or you thought that the previous visit was incomplete in terms of your research objectives?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've had to do this in multiple places. And as you know, we just finished the Battle of Kyiv study after 6 collective visits.
Yeah.
My first trip, actually, as you know, just finding the people to understand, and this trip, also understanding the road to Shusha. I mean, Shusha doesn't happen without the penetration into the line of contact, to the Battle of Hadrut, to many other smaller actual events that lead to that moment. I had to understand all that context. So this time coming back and then knowing what I know now, but then expanding that to walk the path from the very line of contact all the way to Shusha with more experts, because some people know their piece, but to walk it with somebody who knew every piece of it was vital to understanding even the Battle of Shusha within the context of the 44-day war.
Yeah. I saw on your social media accounts your hand-drawn map, these path of from Hadrut to all the way to Shusha, and I guess you walked almost 10 kilometers.
Yeah, that's he drew the map. He drew the map.
Epic journey, yeah.
That was an unplanned.
10 kilometers.
It was 10 kilometers. It was an unplanned path because we took the route to Hadrut that goes through the mountains, but
no one expected so much snow on the other side of the mountain.
Which is, again, if you don't come, you don't know that.
Yeah.
On one side of a mountain, it could be almost barren,
sunny,
and on the other side, it's forested, deep snow. And this happened, the war happened in November. All that's still an element of this.
Yeah. Well, this time, John dragged you along.
Last time I wanted to go with him, but I had plans with my wife, and I wanted to stay married. So.
But what was your key expectation, and what is your main takeaway now?
Yeah, I mean, really, it was like you have to see it to understand what this city is up there. And I'm actually retired Special Forces. I spent 27 years in our military, a good chunk of it is Special Forces. So, people say, the hard way to get up there, but you're going up there light. You don't have a lot of backup, so you've got surprise is really the only thing you've got. And so that's why you look at the routes and you go, yeah, it's hard, but that would be the hardest route is a route you want to go, because that's not the route they're expecting. But the one thing I think that people don't really understand enough about the Battle of Shusha is, the Special Forces kind of get the credit for it, but I don't think it's really all the conventional forces operations on the outside of the town, right? Drawing all the forces away so that when they go in the city, they don't have to clear it of hundreds and hundreds of Armenian fighters. And so, that gets the attention, but it's all those forces working together, right? The conventional forces working with it, the artillery, mortars, whatever. And so it's you can focus in on that, but you have to understand everything around Shusha, understand Shusha by itself, and you can't just focus.
That's an interesting moment, because when here in Azerbaijan especially, when we refer to the Battle of Shusha, it's usually about the special forces who were carrying light weaponry. Of course, no heavy artillery was available during climbing inside the city, and you use an interesting term in this very book, hugging. That's right. Which means you don't have enough distance to use heavy type.
But you also do it so they can't use theirs as well.
That's correct. Yeah. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for the Shusha part of our interview. If you have time, I would like to ask you a couple of questions about the other ongoing conflicts, which are actually close to our region. One in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, another in the Middle East. In Gaza, we have ceasefire, but the conflict was quite fundamental and will be discussed for the decades to come. Regarding Ukraine, Laim, I know that you served as a defense advisor to Ukraine, so I guess you also contributed to defense system and resistance the Ukrainians have been showing us since day one. How prepared were the Ukrainians for the war?
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely prepared for it. I mean, one thing I know when we were defense advisor, I think a lot of people in the U.S. never thought that Russia would invade, but that was the thing that was clear when we were over there, that the Minister of Defense, who was Mashenko at the time, like he worried, he knew it was going to happen. He just didn't know when. But he truly believed that Russia was going to invade, and I think that gave them really the motivation to make really tough reforms to their military and try to go as fast as they could from a Soviet-style military to a Western-style military. And people, the listeners won't understand what that means, but I think the biggest change is really what we call mission command, or the Germans call it Auftrugtaktik, but empowering lower leaders to make decisions on the battlefield, because the speed of warfare in the 21st century is too slow for the rigid Soviet style. And that's why part of the reason Azerbaijan was so successful is they were fighting with a kind of a NATO, Western military that they learned from the Turkic. And Azerbaijan was still kind of on this old Armenia, still fighting on the old Russian.
Well, that caught the Russians by surprise in the early stages of the war, but later, as many military experts claim, the Russians managed to adapt to these type of warfare somehow. But what about the current state of the front lines in Ukraine? Could you characterize it as a stagnation or Russia gaining an advantage, especially prior to the much speculated ceasefire?
Yeah, I mean, Russia's advantage, and the only advantage they really have from the beginning of the war, is mass, right? They're much better, they're much bigger than Ukraine. Yeah. Ukraine has the advantage when it comes to leadership, training, doctrine, weapon systems, right? So they have advantage in these other things, but mass is a significant advantage focused to how big they are. So that's why they've been able to make some forward gains. And when you've seen historically over the war, when Ukraine has been low on artillery, for example, eventually this horde of Russians that Putin doesn't care about his own soldiers dying, right? Then that's when they can kind of make the gains. And so that's kind of how you've seen it throughout. I mean, Ukraine's a smaller nation. They're not willing, they don't have enough people to just hold terrain at all costs. And so they give it up when they have to and slowly pull back. And so that's kind of what you see more recently, is pulling back where they have to if they just don't have the weapons of war to really keep the Russians at bay.
Yeah. Well, I also wanted to ask you about the nature of the war in the past few months. Do you feel there was a shift toward the more attritional warfare? And if so, how does this affect both Ukraine's and Russia's military strategies, especially their human resources?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the longer the war goes on, is typically going to favor Russia, right? They have larger manpower, they can pull for it. But, right, even being the larger nation, if they were doing so well on manpower, they wouldn't have North Koreans in there fighting on their behalf, right? So it's definitely straining them as well. But yeah, being a bigger power, they can sustain it longer. So it plays into the advantage to draw this out. That's why, as you see kind of the peace talks going on now, and the Ukrainians have offered hey, let's discuss this. And now it's in Putin's court, and what I would expect to see coming soon is Putin will come up with excuses why they don't want to do a ceasefire. And we'll see that they've not been sincere about a ceasefire, and they never have been.
Well, if I can come to you again, John, in February 2022, you published this famous guide, the mini manual for the urban defender, designed specifically for the citizens of Ukraine on how to defend their cities. Can you speak about this material a little bit, and how useful was it back then for the Ukrainians?
Sure. And this is, of course, after we had met and after I didn't know that would be needed or that I would be the person to write it. When the Russians invaded, I was sitting in my home, but watching martial law be declared by Ukrainians and the Ukrainian government trying to use a small military to start a much bigger military invading. But I could also see the Russian advances, which is a critique. They were attacking 7 different cities at once, from Kyiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, Kherson, Mariupol, 7 different fronts they were attacking. But the one that mattered most was, of course, the capital city. War has a political goal. The goal is to overthrow the Ukrainian government. They take the capital. Ukrainians show that they will resist, but the war would have been over. The Ukrainian government, though, started putting out over the radio, resist. And that's all they did, was they were saying, resist. And they started handing out AK-47s and telling everybody to make Molotov cocktails. But I saw that I could do a little bit more than that, having studied every urban battle, even the ones where defenders were able to hold the cities or cause a big problem, from the Battle of Seoul, Stalingrad, Aachen, all these where there's tactics you can do. So I wrote the manual for just go out and block the streets and how to stay safe. The manual started with really just don't stand in the open, things like that will keep you safe. But in war, a lot of people, you can even look at Susha, the goal is to keep them out. And if there's tens of thousands of civilians, yes, it's very controversial to tell a civilian to fight because then you turn them into a combatant. But if all the civilians, which they did in places like Kyiv, but they also did it in Kyiv and Ri, they did it in Mariupol, where they joined to resist because war is a contest of will. And I just had a couple recommendations as somebody who studied urban warfare, and it was used. And to my surprise, I didn't understand that the Ukrainian government would put it on their website immediately in Ukrainian for their people. They started printing them out across the country. It eventually became not needed because then it was a defensive war turned into an offensive war. In the beginning, though, it spread and they printed it out. And I met on our visits Ukrainian commanders who were handing it out because people forget that what people don't know about war. If civilians want to help defend their nation, they don't know what to do. And it's actually an old concept in Europe. It's called total defense, where if we get invaded, we're all going to help, right? Like Finland and the gun culture and hunters and things like that. But despite what the movies say, like movies like for us, Red Dawn, people needed to know what to do, and my manual helped a little bit.
Yeah, the government's just telling them to resist, but they want to, but they don't know how.
Right.
We knew in 2014 and 2015 that Ukraine, they have the will, right? They just need some help. And so this was one way to help them, tell them how to resist.
Yeah. Well, before the interview, we agreed not to discuss the political or geopolitical implications of the conflict in Ukraine because there are tons of materials about this everywhere. But I'm much more interested in getting your summary about the whole conflict or some specific battles in Ukraine. Why are they interesting or important for military experts like yourselves? What kind of lessons can be taught in military schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the Battle of Kyiv, and you're talking about at the beginning of this, Shusha being a key battle in that war. Well, the defense of Kyiv, that was a key battle in the war.
Decisive battle.
It didn't win the war for the Ukrainians, but it kept them from losing. And I don't think people realize how close they came to losing. The Ukrainians thought Russians were going to invade from the east. They really didn't think they were going to go to the city. And if you look, they had one understrength mechanized brigade defending a city of 3 million people. And so they thought if the Russians did attack, it'd be coming from the east on Kyiv, not the west. So they had one battalion, basically in the war for Ukraine, one battalion defending against many brigade tactical groups. And I don't think people realize really that was basically that small element that saved the nation with volunteers and others that kind of rushed forward and helped it. But to really understand how close it came to falling. In hindsight, people don't think that because Ukrainians have fought so well, but it was close. And on the day of the invasion, Russia had about 140 kilometers to go from the border to the capital, and the Ukrainians' defenders were 100 kilometers south of their position. They weren't even in their position. So when it kicked off, they were rushing 100 kilometers north to their battle positions through streets that are filled with civilians trying to flee the capital.
For me, and I know as a research center, is that there's, as a student of war, and like what you're studying even Susha, is like, there's not one reason it went the way it did. And it's not one solution. Like everybody wants this, invest in drones and you'll be the most powerful. It was absolutely an all arms, combined arms thing. So Russia got taught that lesson when they attempted what they attempted and failed, because they were over-relying on maybe one aspect of taking out the air defense versus holding ground or taking ground. And that's been the evolution of the different cities, where you have a case like Mariupol, where just a few thousand fighters can hold for 2 months, which changes the entire geography of the overall war. In research centers like us, that we get to step back and look at those different attributes by fully understanding all the decisions and both the successes and the failures of both sides that end up determining what happens. And I think Ukraine, there's so many of those, but Ukraine's gone on so long that people can now, analysts say, like this is the reason, like it's this. Like no, it's you're fast forwarding through everything that's happened from, like you said, the mobilization, where Russia literally uses human waves in like Bakhmut, where they send 40,000 prisoners to overwhelm somebody who doesn't have the firepower to stop human waves. But some people try to like summarize it all and say, well, this is the reason. They're just too small. Like, no, they didn't have the right equipment at the right time or the right ability to do an operation in this terrain where, a city like Severodonetsk, yes, which is, one side's high, one side's low, is completely different than like a battle of Kyiv. That's why I love the work that we do, even in research centers, is to be able to look at every individual case very specifically.
Yeah, and recently, in late February, you had this interesting publication on your website about the Battle of Kiev in the 3rd anniversary of that very battle. In the final third of our interview, I would like to go a little bit south and discuss the war in Gaza. I know that you've been there multiple times. You have first-hand experience. I would like to start from the final part,
okay,
of the conflict. Again, putting politics or geopolitics aside, from the military point of view, what is the outcome of the war? Can we easily identify the winner and the losing side, or what was the result of the war? How would you assess it as a military man?
And I've written this for Foreign Affairs on, Israel has been winning the war since being attacked. They've been winning as in achieving their goals, but war is a contest for political goals. So Israel set these certain political goals, like the overthrow of the Hamas regime, both militarily and politically. So I can't tell you if they're going to win until we know for sure. So for me to assess win or lose, it's really an answer of, does Hamas keep power in the Gaza Strip after no matter how long? Kind of like when the Taliban returned to Afghanistan, they won. It took 20 years, but they came back, and like in other wars. So as a military analyst, a shared framework of understanding winning versus losing, by taking the strategic goals of both sides at the beginning of the war, you can say who won or who didn't win. But war is human as well, so I can't tell you if that's going to happen, no matter how many times I visit. I can tell you what the progress of the war has been, like Israel's ability to dismantle Hamas's military, fundamentally as a military. Doesn't mean that they have achieved anything politically, as in removing Hamas's ability to govern the Gaza Strip and its population, because they have political constraints. In every war, you have to look at through the political constraints and even the information warfare aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Israel was put at a disadvantage from the very beginning of what people thought Israel was doing, despite nobody going there to know. They only listened to, which is different in wars. And the Karabakh war was one of the first two, where you had both sides tweeting at each other, this is what I did today. I destroyed this much of you. And I'm like, no, I destroyed this much of you. some of that aspect's not new, but it's actually definitely different in the modern technology world. In Gaza showed that, where everybody has a cell phone and can watch the war, which you couldn't do in the Karabakh war. And everybody can watch almost every event through their cell phones and form their own opinions. But you asked me a simple question. I can't tell you who's going to win. I can tell you who's winning right now. Israel dismantled the military. Israel believes it has the will to ensure that Hamas doesn't govern Gaza. But there's a problem there of actually taking the step which is necessary to remove Hamas would require somebody to occupy Gaza until a new power can live.
Well, since you made a comparison between the war in Karabakh and the conflict in Gaza, can we a little bit expand this subtopic? And this will be my final question to you, gentlemen. What are the main similarities and key differences among these three cases, war in Karabakh, war in Ukraine, and war in Gaza, in your understanding? Could you summarize it? I know the context, everything, they look so different, but as military people, can you identify them in a more understandable language?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, one is a matter of will, right? We saw the Azerbaijanis had the will to go in there, right? Ukraine, that will to fight against a stronger power, and Israel, right after October 7th, right? They had the will to continue this. Initially, I thought it might not last 30 days, but they have the will, and then I think a second piece is, preparation. And, the Israelis may be less prepared for that kind of operation, but they made some changes in their military, learned from previous conflicts, and so went in there fairly well prepared, right? Azerbaijan was prepared when the time came, and then same thing, Ukraine was prepared to defend itself. So I think you've got to have that investment, being prepared as an investment, right? Political will, individual will. I think those are some similarities between how the performance.
So we could do mini videos comparing the differences. I'll just give you a couple, such as the strategic level. That Karabakh was a very directed mission, counterattack with an objective, but it was focused on that. In Israel-Gaza, when Israel was attacked on October 7th from Hamas, Hezbollah attacked on October 8th. Yeah. The Houthis attacked shortly thereafter. Iran attacked Israel during all of this. So from the strategic level, you're trying to fight a war with an objective while having to split all your forces to defend your entire survival, to include nation states attacking you. From a strategic level, I think that's a very big difference, all the way down to the reliance on external partners to survive. So in order, if I started just to do the analysis of Gaza war and say, well, this is what Israel needed to do. But I also know enough now that Israel, because of its need of the international community to include the United States, couldn't do those things. Like the really big one also tactically is that in the Karabakh war, many of the urban areas, the civilians were able to leave them before the main fighting starts happening. In Gaza, because of many factors, the civilians aren't even allowed to move as refugees temporarily into Egypt. So Israel is forced to fight this war within that context. That's a big difference in urban warfare, when the people aren't able, not because of you're attacking, but because there's another country saying, you can't come to my country. That's a huge difference in the two.
Well, Liam, John, thank you so much for this interesting conversation, and I hope to see you again in Azerbaijan sometime soon.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us.